So hello once again, everyone. Welcome to the 8th SONNET webinar. This time we are going to talk about how to finance renewable energy in Europe. My name is Olga Krajewska. I'm Officer for Governance and Social Innovation at ICLEI Europe. I'll be moderating today's discussion. And this webinar is a part of the SONNET webinar series on social innovation and energy transition. And today is actually the last edition of the series. Yep, that's right. The webinar series was kicked off almost exactly 2 years ago in March 2020, and today you are joining us for the last time in this format. So before we kick off today's webinar, I just would like to take a minute for a very quick recap. During our webinar series, we're joined by over 30 experts and practitioners working on social innovation in energy transitions. We spent over 10 hours together online exploring what social innovation in energy is all about and how it can transform our energy systems. And almost 500 people took part in our webinars. We hope that we sparked your interest in social aspects of energy transition and that you will continue exploring this topic. So many thanks to everybody who contributed to the SONNET webinar series and made it possible and made it a success. And if you are interested in catching up with the past editions of the SONNET webinars, you can find the recordings on our SONNET website. The link should be pasted in a chat so you can copy it. For our last webinar, so today we selected a very interesting and quite complex topic that we would like to dive deeper into because today we will discuss how to finance renewable energy. We will try to assess the topic, and this is also a small request from my side to our panelists in an accessible and simple way to really unfold the financing mechanisms that are out there, what are the roles of different actors in financing renewable energy, and what is necessary to increase investments in renewables. The discussion will be somewhat based on the SONNET case studies that we did as a part of the SONNET project on innovative financing mechanism. So if you're interested in learning more about these case studies, I invite you to visit, again, our website. They are compiled in our second energy read. So if you're interested in having an overview of what these case studies were about, because we had more topics than just financing, you're very welcome to use this resource. And the plan for today is to start with the first round of discussions about the European level and talk about main trends, challenges, and opportunities for financing renewables in Europe. And then we will continue with the second round, during which we will zoom into 3 fossil-fueled European countries, Netherlands, Poland, and the UK, to better understand who are the central players in financing renewables and to capture similarities and differences between these 3 countries. About halfway through the webinar, we will invite participants to turn on their cameras and microphones to be able to ask questions directly to our speakers. Until then, I would kindly ask the participants to please keep your cameras and microphones off to avoid any background noises, but you can of course always use the chat in case you need help connecting or prefer to ask your questions via chat function. My colleague Adrian Kotler, who is actually a co-host of this of the SONNET webinar series, will be monitoring the chat and trying to respond to all your questions and comments. Perfect. After the discussion part, we will finish the webinar with the final statements from our speakers, in which they will propose steps to move forward in financing renewable energy, including recommendations for different types of actors. Originally, we hoped to collect and to compile a catalog of 10. Well, let's see how it goes. Let's see how the discussions unfold. And the last information I would like to share is about the format. We decided to avoid presentations with slides. So the only slides I'll be using is to present our speakers. Afterwards, we'll just have a more open panel discussion. So participants are very welcome to join, post their questions in the chat, and then join the open conversation. And without further ado, I would now like to present our speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Friedman Polzin, who is Associate Professor at Utrecht University School of Economics and a Research Associate at the Sustainable Finance Lab. And together with his colleagues, he investigates the role of entrepreneurship and sustainable finance for accelerating the European energy transition in several research projects. He coordinates master program business and social impact and teaches highly evaluated courses on sustainability, societal impact, entrepreneurship, innovation, business economics, and research methods at the bachelor and master level. Welcome. We are very happy to have you here, Friedman. Our next speaker is Bernard Swoczyna. Bernard will be presenting the Polish perspective during today's webinar. He's a senior expert in the energy and climate program at the Instrat Foundation. He's a specialist in renewable energy sources, energy storage, efficiency and cooling, author of numerous energy efficiency projects and analysis, example for the food industry, producers of polymer components and retail chains. And our third speaker, who will be bringing in a more local perspective, is Richard Lowe, who worked for 18 years in the renewable energy sector, including the last 9 years as the investment program manager for Bristol City Council. He manages a small team of energy professionals, designing, financing, procuring and delivering renewable energy projects, including solar PV, solar thermal batteries, and operation of public charge point network throughout the west of England region. Welcome once again to all our panelists. And I think having said that, we can kick off our discussions. Yes, we would like to start from this European level, talk maybe a bit in a macro scale about how to finance renewables in Europe. And I would like to ask you, Friedman, to maybe kick off our discussions. The first question that I prepared is quite broad, so let's see, how much in detail we can actually go into it. But well, we know how much money we will approximately need to achieve a carbon neutral economy by 2050, or we can at least estimate. But it is way less clear where this money will come from. So today I would like to kick us off with a big question about the role of the European financial system in a transition towards more sustainable energy systems, and about the main trends that you are observing in financing renewable energy in Europe.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and yes, I think that is right. 80 to 200 billion euros question that you asked, right? So that's approximately how much we need in making the shift from fossil fuel-based electricity production to renewable energy-based electricity production. So that's basically what you look at. And what we also looked at in the large European project that finished last year called InnoPass, where we looked a bit into the future, looking at a couple of scenarios. One of them is called New Players, right? And it basically already tells the story. So there will be a lot of new organizations emerging that need to do the electrification, right? So there will be a lot of different kind of business models also emerging, and together with this also the change in kind of where the money comes from. So what we now see is, and you asked me whether the European financial system is up to the task, I would say quantitatively yes. We have, at least in our analysis, and I told you the 80 to 200 billion euros a year. That sounds a lot, but I mean, we did some calculations and also very, very conservative. So we only looked at newly generated kind of lending and assets under management. So debt and equity, that's basically the main sources of funding. And then you see that the institutional investors alone, and I'm talking about insurers, pension funds, but also sovereign wealth funds. I think the most well-known is the Norwegian one. And together they almost on their own could basically supply this money. So what we have in abundance in Europe is kind of institutionalized money that basically addresses large tickets, so larger scale infrastructure on low risk, with also low return. So that's basically the two metrics that probably will come back now in the next couple of hours. So risk and return are still the kind of the main two metrics that investors will be using. So there's no problem in tapping into these sources, but the problem is they basically finance the status quo more or less, right? So they have a particular mandate. They need to invest in listed equity. So, for example, in energy utilities, they've invested in the past. But now what they need to do is finance renewable energy, which is kind of what we call off balance sheet, so not part of the existing companies, but they are kind of independent projects. So they need to assess the kind of the risks there. So that's for them it's a huge challenge, because for them it's also still, I mean, you could consider renewable energy technologies relatively mainstream, but for larger kind of investors, this is still something to wrap their head around. So the good news is there is no financing gap, right? There's, I think in the 2010s or early 2000s, everyone was talking about the financing gap. It's not there, at least not for Europe. There's other contexts where this might be the case, but it's a qualitative mismatch, right? So we need also very small scale, decentralized kind of money, because that's how we envisioned the transition to go, next to also having kind of a grid infrastructure and also larger projects, right? So offshore wind, the Netherlands, we are planning. So that's all the playing field for the big guys. But we, on the other hand, we need a lot of investments in small scale, and there is actually a lack. So small scale new technologies, like my other panelists will address, like energy storage. In the Netherlands, we're talking about hydrogen infrastructure, for example. So there's, for all the kind of innovative solutions, there is still kind of underinvestments going that we kind of diagnose. On the other hand, it's a good environment for investments, right? Low interest rates, that's very important, because for renewable energy, that's the main costs. Financing costs are the main costs. So you have a bit of maintenance, but sunshine for free, wind bills for free, no fuel costs. So financing costs are even more important than for all the fossil fuel-based power plants that we have seen in the past. So actually, conditions are pretty well, but this mismatch is still persisting. So maybe we can then look together with my other panelists at a couple of solutions, but then I won't want to take too much time off their speaking time, and hear their perspectives on whether they also see this.
Perfect. Thank you, Friedman. Yes, indeed, it would be good. It would be nice if we can maybe go a little bit more in detail later on. Yes. Well, moving to Bernard, because we now addressed a little bit of role of private sector and private investment that will actually predominantly finance energy transition. I also would like to hear about the role of governments, actually, in government sector, but I think this will already kind of link to the solutions, but kind of discussing how to finance renewable energy on the European level. I also must ask about the role of European Union, and I thought, Bernard, maybe you would like to address this topic. So we know that we have ambitious goals, and European Union is creating certain frameworks to help us push towards this goal and kind of to make sure that we are on time. How do you see the role of EU in supporting member states to reaching the goal that they set?
I see the role of the European Union as absolutely crucial, because it can provide both the carrot and the stick, and can also provide the funding. I can talk about a case study from Konin region. This is in central Poland. I have attended a webinar about district heating out there a week ago. 2 days ago, I have been there in person, and I have seen that the municipalities whose role is providing the heat, not the electricity, really have a big challenge with changing from fossil fuels, mainly coal, to renewables. The region, the Konin region, is facing a big transition from coal to renewables in two important areas, electricity and heat. The region has historically been a large center of lignite mining. It has provided more than 2,000 megawatts of electricity, so it was a big electricity exporter. Now the region is building a lot of renewables, particularly photovoltaic farms, biomass power plants, and wind farms. They also plan to build a small hydrogen production facility with hydrogen buses for local transport, but it's obviously of a much smaller scale. It is only a few hundred megawatts, and of course the production is lower. So Konin region will change from a major electricity exporter to a minor electricity exporter. The main investor is the same company that currently operates the coal mines and coal-fired power plants. This is perhaps the only Polish large coal company that is not owned by the government. And now it is a leader of the transformation from coal to renewables. However, the change will mean a major reduction of jobs from more than 4,000 to perhaps a few hundred. So it would be a change for good for the climate, but of course it will greatly diminish the economic potential of the energy in this region. The second major area of transition out there is heat, because most towns and cities in Poland have district heating. Larger ones have cogeneration plants. They have been built in the times of communism, because then with central planning, the energy efficiency was poor, but the government tried to compensate that by providing cogeneration. So coal was burned more efficiently than in Western Europe. However, the buildings were not as efficient. So in fact, the coal consumption was very high. And now the region has to transform from coal heating to another types of heating. And it is a big challenge, because heating grids and heat sources for the district heating are in the hands of local governments, which do not have much money. And the potential investments are very, very high. The easiest solution would be to change to fossil gas. And it is very often done in many cities in Poland. However, in the Konin region, they wanted to have something really green, really renewable, and they started to drill for geothermal heat. This requires very big amounts of money, because one drill can cost more than 5 million euros. However, once it is drilled, it provides almost free heat for most of the year, and only in the really cold temperatures the coal or oil-fired boilers have to be switched on. So geothermal heat is a very good solution. It is really renewable, it is green, it is not as controversial as biomass burning, the other important option for district heating. However, it requires really great amounts of money. And in the Konin region, most of the upfront costs has been financed by the National Fund for Environment Protection.
Bernard, excuse if I just might jump in for a second, because we will have the second round. I see that you directly dove into the Polish case. We will have the second round of discussion where we would like to really zoom in on the national context in 3 countries. So thanks for already presenting these examples. They are really helpful in understanding the context in Poland. But if I may, come back to finish this round to the European context.
Yes, because I want to show this example to show that
Excellent.
External funding from outside of the region is important to really switch from coal or other fossil fuels to renewables. And this national fund is funded mainly by revenues from ETS. So the role of the European policy is to provide a source of funding for those beneficial investments. And the really big challenge and what would really bring change is to make sure that money from ETS will not be spent on a national level on anything, because most of the already garnered funds has been just flowed to the national budget, and it had been spent on anything the government can spend money for, but that money should be directed into the really good investments. Because in the electricity sector, for example, new wind farms or new solar farms have no problem with finding money, because these investments are really profitable, particularly at current electricity prices, both as sale for business, for example, for power purchase agreements, and also on the government organized auctions. So for electricity, it is, I would say, easier than for heat. What would really help from the European Union would be to not only provide this funding, but also to make sure that the money vehicles already provided, like the emission trading system, will really be directed toward good investments.
Thank you, Bernard. And actually, before bringing in Richard to the discussion, I would like to quickly ping pong this actually statement to Friedemann, if you don't mind, because I think in one of the outcomes or outputs of the projects that you were involved in, I think it was InnoPass, I actually read that ETS is an important tool in financing renewable energy and transition, but it won't suffice alone, so it's not enough. Would you maybe like to say a couple of words, like why it's not enough? Why do we need that even if we have maybe higher pressure from the EU to really dedicate this money for the transition, why ETS alone is not enough to really push forward financing for renewable energy?
Yeah. I think the ETS is in general a very good framework if it's also extended to more sector. As Bernard explained, of course the investments need to be, or the generated money need to be spent on the most kind of effective. On the most effective solutions. But in terms of what the investors are looking at, I mean, of course, they're looking at how high the price will be. Until now, it has been relatively low, so it doesn't really factor in for many investments. It's too indirect still. If the prices go up, this might change. Still, it's a market solution, something that economists prefer. But if you want more action more quickly, then we're talking about different kind of instruments, more directly targeting risk and return of specific technologies that you would like to deploy. Otherwise, I mean, you could also leave it to the market mechanism to select the most important ones, but then we might end up beyond 2050, and that is not a kind of a desirable place. I think they're both important, the more direct and the more indirect ones, also having kind of a framework, and also leaving room for alternative solutions to deploy. But if you found some kind of large scale offshore wind or kind of solar parks, then you could think about more direct instruments that are targeted at the risk and return payback period of these individual projects, that have a more direct influence on what private investors are doing than the ETS.
Excellent. And maybe the very last question to this topic, but I really must ask, because these are the topics that we are talking about actually currently, about fairly new policy frameworks such as European Green Deal and EU taxonomy, how they will influence, or will they influence at all, financing for renewable energy? Do you think it's a good opportunity for different sectors maybe to come together kind of in financing renewables, and how this can change also how we attract private investments in renewables? I don't know if Bernard or Friedman, if you would like to have a go.
Well, in case of Poland, it most likely will not affect at all, because Poland has currently has blocked these funds. It has been blocked for Poland because of political reasons. So it is likely that Poland will never see this money, and it will not have any effect at all.
Okay, but Poland is a special case. In general, Friedman, how do you think? Will it have any impact?
I think it is substantial, right? The European Green Deal. So together with this low interest environment that I mentioned later, it's actually a nice opportunity to give direction and also coordinate different kind of policy fields that have been previously separated, kind of infrastructure planning, energy, etc., the European energy market. So I think it gives some kind of tools, and but it should be seen as co-investment, right? So this is the first and foremost the objective of the Green Deal. So how many European euros can I mobilize with this with the budget that the Green New Deal provides? It's also a good way to recover from COVID. Many use this kind of dip to say, okay, what needs to be changed? Where do we see also the jobs in the future? I think this is also a very important aspect of the Green New Deal, if you consider it historically, because that's why we had a New Deal in the 1930s. So I think it can address also a lot of the concerns that Bernard raised. And the other one, the taxonomy, there's a lot of discussion around this. I know that investors are looking for something that is kind of universal, that they can benchmark itself, that they know for sure that this is green. If you look at the discussion around green bonds, there's lots of kind of skepticism and rebranding and then losing the labels again. So there's a lot of, so there needs to be something substantial, but I don't know if including gas and nuclear in this will really help channeling kind of more investment towards renewables, because if they're equally green or maybe a different shade of green, that's the wrong signal for also especially institutional investors that look at this.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. And now I would like to turn to Richard and bring you into our discussion. Well, Richard, you have extensive expertise when it comes to financing renewables at the local municipal level. So I would like to now look maybe at translocal perspective and approach this topic from translocal perspective, asking you, what do you think is the role of European municipalities in financing renewable energy? Is this role, substantial? Well, there are for sure a lot of differences from country to country, but I wanted to hear from you, to ask for your opinion. How do you see municipalities kind of positioning in between different actors who are engaged in financing renewables?
Yeah, thanks, Holger. So certainly municipalities have I believe, an increasing role to play. So as UK and I think most other European territories are now in this post-tariff market world. So over the last 12 years, we've all had a feed-in tariff of some description. Those are mostly all fallen away now. So, what we're looking for is new routes to market. So we've heard from Friedman that institutional finance is not the barrier, and certainly from what we saw at COP in Glasgow in November, that there are trillions of bank finance interested to construct these new projects. So the market, certainly from the UK perspective, operating for very large generators. So offshore wind is certainly the one that the UK's government is backing currently. But what that does is it cuts out a lot of other potential players to generate renewable energy. And actually, you know, offshore wind is not going to be the answer to all of certainly the UK's problems. So what's driving this? We're at the confluence of finding these new markets, but also achieving statutory objectives. So in the UK, it's a 2050 zero carbon target, which was really, really helpful, because what that's done is now in the UK, out of 400 municipalities, over 200 have now signed their own local zero carbon objective. So, and of those, about 2/3 have got a 2030 target, so 20 years ahead of the national target. So all this is driving a very sort of focused view from all the different players in the sector. So from my view in the council, trying to leverage new investment is like, right, we really must improve the renewable energy penetration locally. So so we know that institutional finance isn't a barrier, but the route to market still is. So I think the role that the municipalities are able to play is open up new markets. So we've heard a little bit already. Friedman mentioned bonds, and so as part of the SONNET City Lab, I was leading on testing the appetite for municipal bonds as an alternative financing mechanism for the council in Bristol. And it, you know, it's an interesting journey. We know there's a huge amount of public interest. People are very engaged in discussing and even putting their own money into renewables. But what actually is that, and actually we know that it's a viable opportunity, but for the municipality, there is still a bit of sitting on the fence, if you like, because we know that it's a bit risky. The performance of those renewable energy projects needs to meet the objectives of the investment, and if the performance fails, then the council need to underwrite the difference to pay back the bond owners. So, you know, we need to work through those risks. But there's something that's, I think, potentially else that's going to open up huge opportunities is something called sleeving. So sleeving is something that Bristol are testing this year. And what it is a way of matching a generator to a consumer, because, you know, working at the national grid level, at a very high voltage level, is all very well for an offshore wind farm. But like I say, it's not the answer to all our problems. So to open up the market to other generators, we need to guarantee a price and an off-taker for those generators. So in Bristol, what we're doing, we're setting up what we call a sleeving pool. So at the moment, the council gets only 25% of its electricity needs from renewable generators. So what we're doing is going, right, we need 100%. So we're going to put a auction out for new low zero carbon generators to bid into that, and we're going to give them a guaranteed price over a number of years. So yeah, we're going to work through that model this year, and it'd be really exciting to see actually new generators, particularly community-owned generation, coming into play, and they will then see that route to market for the investors, that, you know, mixture of debt and equity investors behind those new projects. So yeah, just a flavour of what we're doing here, Olga.
Great, Richard. Thank you very much for these insights. It's really interesting, and we will come back definitely to the situation in Bristol. I think, anyways, we already started going rather to this well, national and local level in our conversations. So why not kick off the second round then? in the second round, I would really like to ask you to tell something about or like explain from the country perspective and national perspective, who is financing renewable energy in your countries. We will start from the Netherlands maybe, and who are these central players that really matter in financing renewables?
Yes, the Netherlands has a quite developed financial system. Some people even say it's in comparison to the rest of the economy, it's too developed. But okay, that's a different discussion. So we have a very institutionalized financial system, a huge pension fund sector. I think one of the largest, at least per capita, in the European Union. So they are kind of indirectly financing a lot of the bigger projects, at least, or they're starting to finance. Because the problem with the pension funds is they have a kind of mandate that they, for some reason, at any point in time, need to be available to redeem kind of a lot of the money. So it needs to be liquid, what we call a liquid investment. But a project finance kind of renewable energy project is not a liquid investment. So in that sense, there are still some problems to overcome there. We have also a large commercial banking sector, which is slowly moving there. So we saw this kind of mainstreaming. So in the beginning, we had kind of banks like Triodos that were niche, financing the first kind of renewable energy project. But now also all the mainstream banks have dedicated teams, and they finance this. So that's all not a problem. But the thing is, as I said, who is financing the innovative, the new solution? So the unknown. So we have a bit of an idea how the system will look like in the future. But then the question is, who's doing the new stuff? And we're lacking kind of equity funding in the Netherlands. So to scale this up, to commercialize new technologies, and that's what less formal, right? So as I said in the beginning, we have a lot of kind of institutional money available, but as Richard said, this is not kind of the only route to market that we can that we can take. And one other player, it's one player that recently launched 2 years ago, is called the Dutch European kind of investment bank, or the Dutch KfW, is called InvestNL, and they are specifically targeting these projects, and also taking over some of the risks that the private sector at the point in development where these technologies are, storage projects, hot and cold storage, for example, that they can't bear. So that is someone who can be involved. In Germany, KfW has been very active in this. UK had a green investment bank, and then they decided to privatize it. So that's an important player to really keep this flow of novel kind of technologies entering the market as well.
But and I must ask, how does it work in practice? Because from what I read, unfortunately, this institution hasn't been very successful so far. And instead of really kind of making it possible and investing in projects, to also have this maybe added value of learning that, okay, we will be the first one, to make this types of investment, and we will kind of show the way for the others, that these investments were actually not there. Is that correct? And why
Yeah.
Why is it happening like this? Why not use this opportunity when it's there?
Yeah, the problem is that they also didn't. It's kind of, if you want to experiment, then you have to be bold, right? So otherwise you're doing basically exactly what market participants are already doing. And we have dedicated venture capital, private equity funds that know what they're doing, that have the sector expertise, that come in. But then the question is, the projects that are just a bit bigger, just to demonstrate basically that this is working, and the showing and enabling learning in the financial sector as well, and we're also reducing the cost for such projects. And these are quite large sums compared to what you would usually do with financing a company that is still growing, and we're talking about a couple of million. But then in the tens of millions of euros, these projects on relatively unproven technologies, that's actually where no one wants to go. And so this would be exactly the place where players like Investor now and also KfW have been in the past. And that's something that we openly criticize. So it's not a secret that this is one of the points of critique that they got over the past years. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for explaining. Let's move to Poland. I'm looking at the clock that we also have enough time for our discussion. Bernard, would you like to present main actors, central players for investing or for financing renewable energy in Poland? You already mentioned some, but to maybe put some structure in it. Yeah.
Luckily, almost everyone. The energy consumers, both private households, but also business invest in renewables on their own, particularly in the easiest technologies like photovoltaics. Also, business invests in power purchase agreements with, for example, larger wind farms, but also major energy producers, both state-owned and private, invest in energy transition from coal to renewables in electricity. The municipalities invest in their area of interest, district heating, cogeneration, waste management. So almost all players invest on their own, but the speed of transition is not sufficient. So it would be beneficial if the European Union would provide funds, but also make sure that the funds already collected for the energy transition are really spent on energy transition and not else.
Great. Would you like to say maybe 3 words about My Electricity program in Poland that actually has been really, really successful for what I know?
Yes, the My Electricity program is directed at households, and it is a one-time subsidy for small photovoltaic installations. Initially, it was slightly more than 1,000 euros. Now it was reduced to 600 euros. And it really kicked off the market of household photovoltaics, because we have right now more than 7 gigawatts of photovoltaics installed in the last 2 or 3 years. The majority of all from small installations. So that was really beneficial. And right now, on a sunny day like today, electricity for Poland can generate almost a quarter electricity from photovoltaics. So it was really beneficial because the government provided an easy to get subsidy that was high enough to cost the investment by the private households.
Excellent. And kind of talking about how to engage more people in and citizens. I mean, and maybe investing for renewables. I think Richard, municipalities are actually quite relevant players when it comes to, you know, bringing people on board and creating new ways for people to invest. Would you like to say how are you trying to do this in Bristol? You already said a little bit about the CMBs. How do you collaborate with citizens and try to encourage them?
Well, so the municipalities are in a transition time because of, as I was saying, about the zero carbon policies that they have. There's a strong drive to get there, and everyone understands. I mean, this is implicit though, that you cannot go anywhere near zero carbon without residents being fully engaged in that journey. You cannot impose this this journey on them, and so, you know, all of the retrofits, the renewable energy needs to have full support of your residents. So that is going to be a long journey. But I mean, I was going to answer the round 2 question as well, Olga, about who is financing renewable energy as well, because currently it is all bank finance. The route to market, certainly in the UK, is at the the national grid level for offshore wind. Large solar plants can now access that contracts market, but we're really seeing very little else happening at the local level. So actually, we're in this very kind of, you know, unfortunate position where people want to be involved, they want to invest, they want to host renewable energy projects in their buildings, but the route to market at that local level is very poorly defined. You know, this is a real problem for us. You know, how do we get there? So one of the only things that's driving local generation, I haven't mentioned yet, is planning policy. So one tool that a municipality has is to demand that developers for new buildings implement renewable energy within those buildings. So they will not get their planning permission without doing something very ambitious. So pretty much the only building size renewable energy investments at the moment are from the developers. They don't want to do it, but they have to do it to get their building constructed in this municipality. And so every municipality in the UK that has a zero carbon objective now has these local planning rules. So that is driving a lot of the local renewable energy as well.
Thank you, Richard. Great. Now that we already collected these 3 perspectives from these 3 countries, I suggest that we start with our discussion part. I already saw quite a lot of questions and comments in the chat, so I would now encourage our participants to turn on their videos. And if you want to ask question directly, please raise your hand. And in the meantime, maybe I would ask Adrienne to address one of the questions that were already posted on chat.
Sure. So those who would like to ask questions live, please feel free to turn on your cameras now. We'll try to get through as many as we can in these last 10 minutes. The first question that I saw that came through was a question saying, oh, and sorry, before I reiterate this question, also to let you know, if you do not want to be captured in the recording, which will be shared on YouTube, please just ask your question via the chat. The chat will not be shared, and that way you won't appear in the recording. And the first question we got via the chat was, are financing models changing fast enough, or are new funding institutions copying past risk models to the detriment of ambitions? Is there anyone from our panel who feels prepared to answer that very large question?
Our finance model, I mean, what we see is really learning in the financial sector. So it definitely means that projects that follow certain standards are getting cheaper. It's not a different kind of financing. It's not a different financing model. It's basically debt and equity for a project. So that has been around forever, basically. What we see is a lot of, I'm also active in the alternative, what we call the alternative finance space, non-bank financing. And there we see quite a lot of developments, right? So then you can think about, for example, equity crowdfunding, peer-to-business lending. And in that space, you also see projects dedicated to kind of renewable energy emerging. You have kind of medium scale investment funds where you can also participate as a kind of a retail investors. But yeah, so they still require some kind of return, especially if you finance the kind of the unconventional one. So there is risks attached to it. So that is basically something that I always need to tell people, that projects, and Richard's alluded to that, can also fail. So there's a reason why there's returns to or higher returns than you would probably expect to these projects. But I think they can really fuel the ambitions, because I mean, to finance the new, you need to take these risks, but then the investors need to be compensated to some degree for it. So that's very simple. So, and I think this also, the new kind of funding models, they still follow to some degree this logic, but they enable a much more diverse. Now it's a much more diverse landscape. So projects, companies, they can turn to a much wider range of funding sources, which is actually a good thing, because then you need to get more different kind of unconventional projects financed. So in that sense, there are developments. If it's fast enough, yeah, that is another question.
Since we do have so many people with questions, both live and also in the chat, I might suggest that we just invite one person to answer each question that comes up. So I believe, Anne, I think you were the first person here to turn on your camera to ask a question. I'd like to invite you now to address the panel.
You're talking to me?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, my question is, I'm currently working on a project on sustainable finance in housing and public space, you know, the new energy, new housing. And so what we're looking at is indeed that the classical investment wants a financial return on investment, which you get by extracting nature. And if you want to regenerate nature, if you're more mission driven, so like we want to regenerate, your financial picture is much more uncertain. And so we're looking at these like an ecosystem of financing mechanisms that especially do not have financial return as their first aim, you know, because as Friedemann was saying, that, you know, the financial cost is the biggest cost of the renewable, but it's kind of crazy. What kind of financial system do we have? So if you could say, like, we need to have these mechanisms where, you know, that are mission driven, that are cooperative, that want to achieve the, you know, sustainable development, and then, you know, find the financial solutions that can help them there. What if, you know, instead of just talking about the market, we would start separating these two and say you have companies and banks that are profit driven, and hopefully, you know, if the context is right, green products might give them profit, and then we'll achieve that, which is much more uncertain. Otherwise, we could say, like, let's focus on that part of the market that is mission driven, like the citizen cooperatives and stuff like that. What if we would systematically, you know, develop policies that focus much more on these mission driven, benefit driven initiatives? Because now they're always invisible, you know, they're under the market, but the market has a different goal. So, you know, like Richard was saying, there's a big potential there, but for the moment they're unable to scale. But what if we made them scale? You know, what if we would systematically start talking about the extractive economy, which may or may not, you know, fund the transition, and the regenerative economy, which is now, you know, fighting an uphill battle? What if we change the rules of the game so that it's not an uphill battle anymore?
Shall I try and pick up a couple of those points from Anne? But there's a barrier to develop to more projects that we haven't particularly mentioned in any detail, is the development cost. So there's risk finance needed before anything's constructed. And so, you know, in my experience, we could create a lot more community-owned renewable energy assets in the UK, and certainly across Europe. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people in other territories that have done a lot of exciting things in that space. But what's really the barrier is that financing before construction, doing all the planning and all the other due diligence things. So you know, there is ways to do that, and you know, certainly what I've done at a very small scale is is offer recycling loan funding to community energy projects. So at the moment we're just about to see a community-owned wind turbine built in Bristol. It's going to be a very large one. It's the only way to get the market price you need is build at 4 or 5 megawatt scale. But they're doing it because the council and others have sort of primed that project. And once it's built, that they'll pay back their loan and we can finance another project. So that's really exciting, you know. So these things are possible, but you know, it's scale that you're talking about, and you know, one turbine, you know, is probably a drop in the ocean. But you know, if every municipality had a recycling fund of something of that sort, it's not a lot of money. It's £100,000, right? You know, that's really shouldn't be skin off the nose to a lot of other municipalities to do something similar.
Great, thank you very much. So now I would like to invite, I very much apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Nicolian, to ask the next question.
I'm sorry, I did not have any questions.
I apologize. I did believe that everyone who was turning on their camera had a question to ask, but that is no problem at all. So then next I would like to turn to Phaedra.
Thanks, Adrian. So the question I have goes a little bit to Richard, but also to Friedemann. So I work in Sweden and I lead a project on viable city finance, where we're looking what it costs to become climate neutral in 9 Swedish cities, and then who can pay for it. And so in our engagement with these cities, they have all indicated that green bonds or labeled bonds are not a good option for them because it affects their balance sheet and they are more onerous than normal bonds. And they can go on the market and get regular bonds. It's not necessarily at a better rate for them. The 9 cities that we look at have all issued green bonds. So they talk about, they talk from experience about the process. So I was wondering, how is it viewed across other countries in Europe? And like, how do you see that maybe in the UK and Netherlands, but also Europe? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point, Phaedra, because you're right. The municipal bond has been talked about quite a lot, certainly in COP, in the run up to COP. There was a big drive to sign up a lot of cities to setting up and releasing these sorts of bonds. But actually, what I've seen talking to finance directors here in Bristol and elsewhere is that is quite a risky thing to do. It's on the balance sheet. The councils need to underwrite the performance of those projects, and they're frankly just not in that space. You know, we're coming out of COVID. There's a lot of there's a lot of budget constraints, and these sorts of things just aren't a priority for a lot of these finance directors. So what we're doing in Bristol at the moment is something quite separate, and certainly happy to sort of share offline in more detail, but we're setting up something called City Leap, which in effect is a joint venture partnership between the council and the private strategic partner. So this will be opening up the city to a lot more debt finance from the kind of institutions that Friedman's already spoken about. But what it does do is give that investment right of first refusal to invest within the city. You know, so I don't know how it is in Sweden, but certainly in the UK, the councils own a lot of the land and buildings. They are the landlord for a lot of the city. And so giving one large investor that carte blanche to invest across the city is we think the right way to go about it, instead of, you know, lots of different sales conversations with lots of different building owners and tenants. It's just the cost of sales is too much. So right, we're going to give the whole city to one investor, and they can then build a pipeline and go on a very strategic view over the next, actually be 20-year concession that we will be signing up to that partner. So that's what we think. We'll we're just going to start that this year, so we'll see. We don't have any results to share with you at this stage.
We are already slightly over time, and I'm wondering, Adrian, are there any new questions? I see one about taxonomy, but actually we already addressed it partially, I think. Okay, I see one raised hand. Is it okay for our panelists if we stay 5 minutes longer? Okay, then maybe let's take the last final question from, I think it was Namita.
Sorry, I raised it by mistake. Sorry about that.
By mistake, but we have Roxana who also raised a hand. So
I realized my name was my colleague's name, Namita, but he's a colleague. So sorry about that.
Good, sorry.
Webinar. I just had a question because we discussed quite a bit about the role of municipalities and the excellent example of Bristol. I was just wondering if any thought is being given as to how capacity is being developed at the municipal level in order to manage such financial schemes, or even come up with innovative solutions. So yeah, I just had a question about that because it is key and it could turn into a bottleneck if this is not addressed. And if capacity does not exist at the municipal level, which is very much likely to be the case, then is it being considered to potentially create public-private partnerships or pair up with the private sector, exactly, to make sure there is the necessary capacity to finance renewable energy at the local level?
It's a really, really good point, actually, because building capacity within a municipality is the only way that some of the things that I've talked about are going to happen around private-public partnerships or CMB, municipal bond models. There's a lot of people. So we're in Bristol had the fortune to have been awarded European Investment Bank funding through the Eleanor programme to actually build a team of people. So I'm one of a number of energy professionals working inside the council. And that's been hugely important. I think other cities are now doing the same, certainly in the UK, but across Europe, that building that capacity within the city teams is really the way to unlock all these innovation models. And the alternative is to pay for a lot of consultants. And unfortunately, when you pay a consultant, you not only pay a very large day rate, they certainly get paid more than I do, but also that expertise goes out of the city. And so you're always paying more money for similar advice each time. So I think it's really important not to just keep spending money on consultants, but it is my sort of personal view on that.
I would add that in the case of municipalities, it is important. Yes, it would be a great idea to include other actors as sponsors for the energy transition. But it is important to remember not to put too much debt on municipalities, because many have caps on maximal debt. So this solution should share the burden of debt and the burden of investments to include the real participation in the funding and the financial risks. It really has a great potential, and it has not been widely adopted yet.
Great. Thank you so much to our participants for all your questions, to our panelists for all your answers and presentations before. We are 5 minutes beyond the time, so I think it's a time to wrap it up. I think we'll leave out the final statements then, but Adrienne left our Twitter contact in the chat. So if participants are interested in kind of continuing this conversation, please, you can always reach out to us, and we are happy to connect you to the panelists if they will find time and to respond. So from my side, for the last time, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for this very interesting talk. And thank you to all participants who've been with us throughout the whole SONNET webinar series. It's been a real pleasure to organize these webinars for you, and hope to see you around on the other occasions, other projects. Let's see. Thanks a lot and have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.